The ancient Catan gods, who guide the actions of the Necron multitudes, look bitterly upon the Chaos gods as upstarts and rivals. The Necron troops marched in mindless ranks, overwhelming the Alpha Legion just as they would any other living opponent. And yet, there was almost a vindictive air to the thoroughness with which they slaughtered the vanquished soldiers of Chaos, smashing their shrines and laying waste to their buildings. The Imperium, Eldar, and Tau looked on as one of the forces of evil was thoroughly annihilated. However, as formidable a threat as Lord Feravius Charon and his Alpha Legion Marines had been, their defeat was in no way encouraging. Could any living force halt the tidal wave of Necron death as it crashed over the planets of the Kaurava system? When the Necron legions arrived in Dusala Precinct, the Imperial Guard made every preparation to rebuff their advance. Unfortunately, few walls are thick enough, and few batteries of cannon are heavy enough to stop the Necrons once they are moving in full force. Despite all the tanks, artillery, and tactics he could muster, General Stubbs was helpless against the deathless tide, and the Imperial Guard were overwhelmed. The victory was not swift, but it was absolute. The day after the battle, not even the corpses of guardsmen were to be found. Only a host of new Necron soldiers and new monoliths where Imperial bunkers had formerly stood. The Necrons had even discovered the vast generators that had powered the many factories of the Dusala Precinct, and harnessed the energy for their own terrible purposes. In his last moments of life, Force Commander Boreal suddenly understood the full extent of his error. He had completely underestimated the threat of the Necron horde. With terrifying force, they had poured across the borders of the lands of solitude, slaughtering all in their path. As the last flicker of consciousness was dissipating from his clouded eyes, the great Space Marine reviewed all that had passed, and saw that by the time his scouts had spied the Necrons through their scopes, his defeat was already inevitable. The Space Marines must revise their protocols. Segmentum must be warned. And with that single thought, Boreal tried to rise. But the fingers of a cold, lifeless hand were suddenly clamped around his arm. His soul had not yet left his body, and now it was destined for a more terrible fate than death. He would never join the God Emperor. The brave soldiers of the Order of the Sacred Rose had fully believed themselves girded and steeled against all assault. Most of all in their own bastion on Kaurava 1. So their surprise was great indeed when the Necrons came upon them with irresistible force, making mockeries of their flamers, tanks, and acts of faith. Those weapons might have sufficed against the mortal and the living, but alas, the Sisters of Battle faced an entirely different sort of foe. A foe which no prayers succeeded in averting or casting down. The Necrons swarmed across the cities of Sama District, swallowing whole all that moved, and crushing all that did not. After this was done, where prayers and organ music had once been heard, silence reigned. Silence, except for the dull throb of the Necron generators and the dull thunder of the Horde marching off into the distance.